Hey everyone, what's up? It's Ellie here, and I have been playing Deathloop for the past few days, and I honestly cannot believe I have been. It's been a dream to be able to play it early, so I think it's time to sit down and give my impressions and actually answer your questions when it comes to the game. And I hope I'm as helpful as I can be, because there are certain guidelines of things that I can and cannot say, just so I don't ruin the game for you, don't spoil it, ruin any of the puzzles, that sort of thing. So don't be offended if I missed your question, because either I can't answer, or I haven't gotten to that point yet, or I've already answered it in another question. So without further ado, actually no, first of all, I want to thank Bethesda ANZ so much. I want to thank Arcane Studios. I want to thank Sony so much for being so kind and giving me the opportunity to actually play the game early. You were so enthusiastic about getting the game to me, and when I said I didn't have a PS5 because the code was only for PS5, they made the effort to actually get a PS5 shipped to me as soon as possible. It was a little late, but regardless, I'm still able to play the game right now, which is just mind-blowing to me. The effort, the trust, I just really appreciate it, and I wanted to thank you again. I know I've been thanking you a lot in emails and in tweets and stuff, but I just wanted to do it one more time in this video because it really did mean the world to me, so thank you. Yeah, you guys are amazing. Now, without further ado, I'm going to get into my initial impressions, and I'm going to keep going through my impressions as I answer your questions. So I hope you enjoy. Okay, so from what I've played so far, Deathloop is creeping into my top played games of all time. I'm not saying that to be a kiss ass to Arcane, because I do have some things I would have liked to have seen from them but didn't, and was a little disappointed, but this game is a breath of fresh air. It is a totally different aesthetic to what has been coming out recently, and that alone makes it so much more appealing to me. This 60s to 70s styled environment with splashes of the drab dark 50s military past, and then this retro futuristic layer, and then you've got even this mystical anomaly with the Residuum. I have, at this point, 9 hours in the game at the moment. I might play just a little bit more as I kind of cycle through the questions, and if I have something I probably could answer if I jump back into the game quickly, I'll do that. So by the time I end this video, I probably will have about 10 to 11 hours in the game. But thinking back, if I was more objective focused, I probably could have shaved quite a few hours of that 9 hours I've already played back. You might think, oh, 9 hours, you must be almost halfway through the game. But I've barely gotten into the puzzle of it. I'm not close to solving the puzzle. There are districts I haven't even visited yet. And that's not because I've been feeling that the puzzle is too difficult or anything. It's just simply that there is so much to see and observe that I can't help myself but to spend an hour or two exploring each district I visit. And it's not even a matter of exploring the 4 districts, because for each district there are 4 different times of the day, and therefore 4 different variations of those 4 districts. So essentially we have 16 different levels to explore, and not only that, but there are decisions that you can make that actually change the map. So you could come past 2 Eternalists digging into a wall, and if you leave them alive, they end up creating a little tunnel that wouldn't be there if you hadn't killed them. If you had killed them. And that's not a spoiler, that's been talked about even before I got my hands on the game, so don't get me in trouble. This actually equals even more variations of that district for the rest of the day, so technically there are more than 16 maps. I'm used to playing games where you only have that one mission to explore that level. Once you move forward in the story, you tend not to revisit locations. it's very linear. So of course I don't have to spend 1 to 2 hours in a district when I visit because I can come back in the next loop. But I just can't help myself because it's a habit. So it's nice to know that I can revisit to further investigate things, and you can learn things as you explore other districts about the ones you've already been to, so you end up going back anyway because you have a new lead for the puzzle. So I'll be giving more impressions on things as I answer questions and whatnot, but I just wanted to tell you what my absolute favourite thing about the game was so far, and that is the absolute freedom that it gives you as a player to really get to know the world you're playing in on a whole different level. The first question comes from Fet Gaming on my YouTube community. I'm very confused with how the game works. I thought it was an open world where you had to kill all the targets in a set time, like how you have to explore the world of Outer Wilds before the time is up. Can you explain the whole levels thing for me? So I haven't played the Outer Wilds, so I can't use it as an example, but to put it as simply as possible, you don't have a time limit. The day constantly repeats itself. So you have one day that's segmented into 4 time periods: morning, noon, afternoon, and evening, but you have a choice of 4 districts to explore at any of those times of day. So you have at least 16 different levels to choose from to play over and over as many times as you need to explore and learn the things you need to learn to give you leads and therefore help you figure out how to kill all 8 visionaries in one day. So for example, I could visit the district Updam morning, noon, afternoon, and evening all in a row if I wanted to, just to explore that district and try to master it. And I can do that as many times as I want with any district because there is no time limit. And from what I understand, the game doesn't end until you figure the puzzle out, or maybe sometime after that. I haven't actually finished the game, so I don't technically know how it ends, but I know that there's no time limit in terms of how many loops you can go through. You have a lot of freedom in that way. So hopefully what I was saying earlier in the video and this answer kind of explains it well. Fluffy Doofy asks if there will be a time mode. I don't think so. It doesn't make sense to do a time mode. I guess once you actually learn and figure out that puzzle, you could just try to speedrun it when you play again. But the game actually forces you to slowly play through a day without you being able to choose where to go, because the first mission is very guided in the sense that Colt doesn't know what's going on or what to do, so it's very hand-holdy at the start. Which is why I think a lot of people who have previewed the game have called it hand-holdy, but it does stop doing that and you do get more freedom to do what you want once you complete that first mission. And it took me about 4 to 5 hours, but mostly because I think I was exploring a lot and being quite slow, and I think that's the amount of time that these previews said they had played the game, which in my opinion just wasn't enough time to actually form much of an opinion on the game anyway. But to bring it back to your question and your suggestion of a iron mode, 1 life and timed, I don't think that would work, but perhaps if you had the 1 life thing it could. So if you were to unequip reprise, which you actually can't, but say they allowed you to in an update or something, for example, this reprise gives you 2 deaths per district before you're kind of permadead until the next day. Like how in Dishonored, players could choose not to use their powers or completely refuse them in Dishonored 2, increasing the difficulty of the game, higher stakes, more consequences in a sense. This one comes from the Martini Dini on Twitter, who asks a couple of questions here. Does the game world feel alive? Do the enemies talk to each other, and does Colt curse a lot? Easy one first. Yes, Colt does swear a fair bit, but so do I when I'm frustrated, so I think that's fair enough. So does the game world feel alive? Yes, very much so. Similar to Dishonored 2 NPCs, the Eternalists chat and have emotions. They're even better than Dishonored 2 NPCs, I would say. Some are in relationships that you can learn about by listening to them speak to one another. Some have differing opinions about the loop and what they should be doing with their time. There are even little puzzles within the main puzzle of the game that are little optional Easter egg type leads that are just based around things the Eternalists are doing with their time. So they very much have personality and stories, some more than others, and a neat thing that you can do in Deathloop is tag enemies. You can learn a little bit about them, their weapon, their fighting style, whether they think the day is going to be eventful or not. Just little clues that could hint to how they'll react in a fight with you or how easy it'll be to alert them. It's not quite the heart from the Dishonored game, but it's a handy way to better understand your enemies when considering how you're going to approach the enemy, and it's a nice little replacement for the powered dark vision from Dishonored because you'll be able to actually see their movements through obstructions. Not the whole outline of their bodies moving, but a little alert icon which floats over their head and then shows what weapon they're carrying. Decadent Cookie on Reddit asks if all bodies disappear, and they do. However, there will be a dark shadow cast where they die, and sometimes a bit of residuum looking energy that you can harvest, which will alert enemies if they see it. So this is actually something I've had a little bit of an issue with. Now firstly, I'm about to compare the game to Dishonored again. This game is not Dishonored 3, I don't expect it to be. I just think comparing the two is a great way to explain things because the majority of us are Dishonored fans and understand how these games work already. And they're made by the same studio, by a fair amount of the same people, so it just makes sense that they are similar and therefore comparable to one another. Okay, so in Dishonored, you have the non-lethal option of being able to knock out an enemy and pick up their bodies to hide them so that no one sees them. And there's also the ability Shadow Kill that basically disintegrates enemies you kill and doesn't leave a trace that alerts others. And then there's the element of the rats. They eat away the bodies of enemies, which you can purposefully summon or just drag the bodies over to them. And all of these things help immensely with stealth. But in Deathloop, when someone dies, they disappear, as if they were a projection, and it's like the residuum burns them away, or I'm not sure how to explain it, but they disappear and this dark, ugly mark appears where they died, and there isn't much control you can have over that. It's way too time consuming to constantly find bottles and glasses to lead Eternalists away from the others so that you can kill them in a spot where no one else will notice. So because of this, you really have to plan in what order you're going to kill enemies if you are going to do that, and really think about their pathing. So if there's a large group you want to take out, really think about in what order you're going to eliminate these enemies, because they seem to notice these dark marks and the essence from enough distance to make it somewhat challenging. And this only gets harder as you play the game because of the adaptive difficulty. You can't just grab a body, drag it away and toss it into a dumpster, so this really does make stealth a little bit harder if you are going to be eliminating Eternalists. On that same topic, Awesome Possum 33 asks if you can dismember enemies the way you can in the Dishonored games, or if it's toned down a notch. And basically, you can't. You can hack at them a little violently to kill them, but they just fall to the ground and disappear when they die. Dowd1237 asks how many hours into the game until you're given full freedom to start going after any visionary and area. So I mentioned this earlier in the video, but about 4 to 5 hours is how long I took to get through the first mission. If I was more objective based and didn't screw around a lot to take in the environment, it probably would have been a lot less. Maybe around 2.5 to 3 hours, but I don't think many people are going to spend that little time, and any preview holders who have probably rushed through it a little bit because they needed to make content. Or they're just really good at video games. As I've also said, there seems to be quite a lot to do in this game and a lot to see. I'm at just over 9 hours and have only recently finished the second quest, as well as done a whole loop of the same district over and over again just so I could get to know it really well, because I really wanted to get to know the game more. Especially playing without a sense of I need to get something done and just like experiencing the game and not worrying about any objectives. Dowd also asks if you can change the FOV on console, which you actually cannot as far as I can tell. They also ask if the game explains why everyone but the visionaries are wearing masks and covered in paint. And so far I haven't learnt anything about this in the game. However, this question is actually answered in an AMA by lead character artist JB. And they said, in terms of narration, the reason why people wear masks on Blackreef is to make them equal. Eon program members come from a variety of backgrounds. Some are wealthy people who want to get away from the world. Some are lowlives and criminals recruited to build all of the infrastructure on Blackreef. However, part of the promise of the Eon program was that once on the island, everyone is equal. The masks help enforce that. There is also another practical reason for it. When you're in a time loop, any action is supposed to not have consequences. That's part of the appeal. However, if people can still recognize you, some might hold a grudge about what you did 20 loops ago. And to avoid that, people wear masks, so it's not easy to remember who did what and with to whom. In terms of aesthetic, we thought it would make the NPC look special, communicate about the fact the loop is a massive party day, and emphasize the 60s look through their design. It also makes a good base for being painted. So hopefully that answers your question. Sipahi 12.99 asks if the game is fun. Is it worth $100 Australian, and if it's janky or polished? I think the game is immensely fun. It's been hard to put down. Time passes quite quickly when I play, I'm super engaged, and the writing is quite comical and entertaining. The guns are fun, the powers are fun, and if you're after fun, I would say that so far Deathloop is more fun than any of the Dishonored games. Dishonored is more of an intense, challenging experience. Deathloop is challenging too, but in a more light-hearted way, and it's definitely a brighter and more colourful world generally. Is Deathloop worth the money at launch? And that is literally something only you can determine. I have no idea what your financial situation is, or whether you usually purchase games when they release and it's no big deal. All I can say is that if you're liking what you're seeing so far of the game, because we've seen quite a lot so far, and you usually buy games when they come out and can afford it, then why not? If you're worried it could be a janky, broken mess like maybe how Cyberpunk was for some, Deathloop is nowhere near that experience when it comes to my own experience with using it on the PS5. There are some very small glitches I notice every now and again, like small, almost unnotable issues with textures, and I've had some Eternalists get stuck on things a couple of times. This hasn't been a big deal and hasn't happened often. I've noticed Eternalists might get stuck when they've been alerted and they're trying to get to you. Because they climb and are very mobile, they sometimes get stuck on things that they don't usually walk over, like fallen candy machines, for example. And I've only had one Eternalist get stuck on some stairs while I was waiting for them to turn a corner. So they kind of had me waiting there for a bit like, what the heck is going on? Why are they taking so long? But that wasn't too much of an issue. It actually made them easy to kill. And I found these glitches were way more likely to happen during the afternoon when the maps were covered in a layer of snow. But they aren't really a big deal in my opinion, not game breaking. There is also one glitch that can be a little frustrating. When you go to reload some weapons, they can get stuck in their animation, so they're still like folded, and the only way to fix it is to switch weapons and swap back, or just put your whole gun away and then bring it back up by using like whatever holster button your platform uses. But in 9 hours of gameplay, it probably hasn't happened more than twice. This is a question from Comrade Mate about hand-holding in the game and keeping the player on the golden path. As I said earlier, there's a good 4 to 5 hours of playtime where they will hold your hand. Probably more so than I'd like, because I usually turn off tutorials in games, but it is understandable because the game is a little complicated, and to a regular person that probably hasn't analysed literally everything that has been said and shown about this game, it's probably super helpful. The game gives you leads that you can follow and turn into objective markers. I think they're super helpful, and they only come up if you come past some sort of clue. Like if you listen to a conversation that's helpful, a lead might pop up and be added to your lead journal, so that you can choose to enable the marker and investigate it. I wouldn't call that hand-holding, more like just tracking the things you've technically learnt, and you can basically enable and disable all of it if you want. It's certainly more obvious that it's less hand-holdy when you come out of that first quest. The Auto 22 asks, do guns and abilities you infuse with Residuum stay with you for all subsequent loops? And yeah, they do. You only need to infuse them once, and you can sacrifice these items anytime for more Residuum. They also ask if there is a limit to how many abilities and guns you can save, and so far the answer is that there is no limit. But you'll definitely be sacrificing the things that you don't need in order to infuse the things you want to keep, because infusing can feel a little expensive, so make sure you look around the districts for Residuum infused items to harvest. Julianna asks on my YouTube community page, how far into the game before you can play as Julianna? You can play Julianna after you have completed the first quest, which is about 2 loops roughly, I believe. And I've already talked about how guided the beginning of the game is, so I'll leave it at that. Warlock asks, when or under what conditions does Julianna appear? Julianna has a chance to appear when you are in a district at the same time as another visionary. She isn't always, however. I was in a district with a visionary and she didn't appear, but when I arrived at another district at the end of the day that also had a visionary present, she entered the area. And I don't think she appears at all if you happen to visit 4 districts in a row without a visionary present. The drop and slide assassinations work on her. I actually haven't managed to successfully pull this off yet, but I'm pretty sure we will be able to slide assassinate and drop assassinate her. Can we visit the same district in one loop? Yes, I did this as soon as I had the freedom to explore. I visited Updam 4 times in a row as the day went on to try to master it a little and see how much I could learn throughout the day. It's very much possible and I actually recommend doing it so that you're more likely to really notice those environmental differences each time. KJD3799 asks if we can be invaded by only friends, as well as how does extraction work and could Julianna just camp the extraction points like in Escape from Tarkov or Hunt Showdown. We can choose to only be invaded by friends or invade friends only as Julianna. And when Julianna invades Colt, all exits and tunnels are locked. They can only be unlocked by hacking an antenna that controls them, which they will point out with a marker. Julianna could potentially camp the exits, but there are multiple that are far apart, so it actually wouldn't be easy. She can, however, camp the antenna needed to unlock the exits. Norby asks if there are a lot of readable notes, documents, and books in the world like Dishonored and Prey. If it has to do with the main puzzle and story, then yes, there are a few notes here and there, but they mostly exist for a reason, if that makes sense. It's more about noticing that if you come back at a certain time, something might change. You might be able to do something about that based on your decisions, or it's mostly about the main narrative. We were asked not to show notes and stuff, so I won't go into very much detail, but in Dishonored there were like stories and songs and poems and notes between people that didn't really have a reason to exist other than world building. I haven't seen that level of detail in the form of notes and audio messages, but I have seen quite a few of them. It's just not on the same level as the other games. I think this might be because the actual NPCs, the Eternalists on the map, are quite lively and they are quite chatty, and there is a fair amount that you can learn about them just by listening to them and watching them. And then there's a lot of environmental storytelling that isn't directly in the form of notes. There is a little bit of art to observe as well. Dante Graham on Reddit asks 3 questions. Can you change the aim down sight sensitivity? And yes, you can. Do I see a meta emerging, like a gun or a few that clearly outshine the rest in several areas? Well, I think shift is going to be a power that everyone has unlocked and equipped. Pair that with perhaps havoc to bring up your damage resistance and a strong shotgun like a higher tier Strelak 50/50, and it could be a good time. There's also these neat limp 10s that are like little submachine guns you can dual wield, and you can find them with a vampire effect that restores some of your health while damaging the enemy. But I can imagine so many amazing builds. It just really depends on your playstyle, so I don't think we will see people using the exact same things all the time, but I think there's a strong possibility that there could be some really nice builds that people would come up with for the game. How is PvP? Does it feel polished or janky? I don't mind the combat in this game. I actually really enjoy it. I'm just not a console player, so trying to navigate creative combat when you're barely used to using a controller at all has been pretty jank, but I don't think that's the game's fault. I think it's mostly my fault. But I'm really excited to give it a go on PC though. Some unknown guy asks whether we can start a new game whilst in the middle of one. And the answer is yes, you can select an option to reset Colt's progression, but you can't go back to the progression you were at before you reset. This brings us to our next question from Sircruxum. How does the save system work in this game? Is it manual save or auto save? Deathloop does not have a traditional save system. The game automatically saves when you reach a menu screen, before and after you visit a district, or when the loop ends. So I would recommend backing up your save files and going through all that technical stuff to try to save your progress to go back to if you wanted to reset Colt's progression, as I spoke a little about in the previous answer. Pebble Frog asks if there are silent ways to go through the levels and if there is a non-lethal option. You can totally run through the levels mostly unnoticed. I haven't achieved this yet as I'm still working on obtaining some abilities and trinkets, so it's really hard in the beginning while you're trying to learn the ropes of the game and you have no powers to like shift to creatively move through the maps. However, the map design is really smart and does allow for you to navigate well around the obstacles in multiple ways that don't always need an ability like shift. The game also allows that you get a trinket called Spring Healed quite early in the game, so even though you don't have the shift ability, you'll be able to double jump, which does help you navigate the map so much better. But yeah, the map is really creative. It does give you multiple ways to traverse around the map, and it's very smart. Like if you're about to climb over something and you're about to come up to a fence line of a sort, or like a wall, a short wall to peer over, that wall's always going to be solid because they know that's where the player is going to climb up. But then you can move a little to the side and all of a sudden, instead of a solid brick wall, it's turned into steel bars that you can peer through. So if you're going to be climbing over this ledge, you're not instantly in the view of all these enemies. You have the ability to kind of slowly peek and just kind of get a view of what you're getting yourself into if you move forward. And I think that design is just so intelligent. You can tell they've just really thought about all the different ways that a player is going to try to climb and move through the map. Back to like silently eliminating enemies and such, you can take them down with a blade or even your hands via a sneak attack. And you can also kick enemies off of cliffs with a dedicated kick button. But there are no non-lethal ways to eliminate an enemy. However, the takedowns are technically non-lethal as they will respawn the next loop. Abdul asks, in my opinion, how much of an immersive sim is Deathloop? It certainly has immersive sim qualities. It's not open world, but you have the freedom to explore the districts in whatever order and the way you like. You can make choices that impact the districts later that day. And there are multiple ways to get past obstacles, take down enemies, including the visionaries. There's never only one way to do something. The only thing that we don't have that control over is the fact that there is only one solution to the overarching puzzle. Each visionary has a place they're set to be in order to end the loop. In terms of interactivity though, I was a little disappointed in the fact that we couldn't interact with things as much. We can't open dumpsters, for example, which I kind of get because we can't hide bodies anymore, but I was just kind of shocked by the fact that we couldn't do those little silly things like open cupboard doors and flush the toilet and turn on the taps. And I think coming from a place where I just expected that interactivity, it was a little jarring. I couldn't mess with so many things I was used to messing with. But it's not all that bad. It was a very minor thing, and there are just so many greater, better things about this game that I wouldn't dwell so much on that fact. These questions from Panda23 got downvoted, but I'm still happy to answer some of them. So, are the puzzles BSy? Well, I'm not really sure what your definition of BSy is, but I think the puzzles are a mix of, yeah, that makes sense, as well as, oh, that's actually pretty challenging, I'm gonna have to really think about this one, and I really like that. There are some really abstract ones, and there are some really straightforward ones. I actually really enjoy Karnesis. It's hard to in-depthly explain Karnesis, it's just fun to pick people up and throw them around. There's also a setting to somewhat change the way it works based on your preference. And for those who haven't seen the power in use yet, we do see it in some of the promotional videos for the game as well. So for those questions that are asking me, who has Karnesis and, you know, what is Karnesis, I'll put it on the screen. Technically, I'm not supposed to be telling you who gives you what powers, but this one we kind of already know, so, you know, figure it out. Can we tell Julianna to shut up? No, I'm sure Colt would want to every once in a while, but I can assure you the interactions with Julianna are not obnoxiously common, and I personally enjoy the interactions. And lastly, how long did it take for the game to click with me? Probably halfway through the first mission, I was like, yep, I really enjoy this, and I actually wished so much that I could go live in that moment and share my experience with the game, because I really was just having so much fun. I wanted everyone to see what I was doing. Fortunately, it's not possible, but I can't wait when I can go live pretty much as soon as the game drops. Hyper Viper asks how the PS5 controller features are utilised. There's actually a little video Arcane released recently about the haptic feedback on the controller, which visualizes the sensations you'll feel while playing the game. I will say that the vibrations are lighter and heavier depending on what gun you use, absolutely. I do find that the haptic feedback aids immersion, but it won't make me buy a PS5. Velden Gamer asks, how customizable are the HUD and UI? The HUD and UI are basically completely customizable. There's a whole tab that breaks off into 2 pages for this. One is language, where you can play around with subtitle, opacity, size, and language. You can also go into audio and choose different audio languages, so they can be 2 different languages if you want. And then there is the HUD, which does all sorts of things like toggling the different kinds of notifications, prompts, messages, objective markers, crosshair customization, as well as the display of health and power meters as an on, off, or minimal setting. This question is about the adaptive difficulty in Deathloop. Does it work well, or does it make the game too easy or too hard at times? So Deathloop doesn't have difficulty settings or levels that you can choose from. It has something called adaptive difficulty, so it will bend itself to you basically. If you're performing well, the game will get slightly harder. The adaptive difficulty is not something I fully understand yet, but from my experience, the Eternalists have gotten harder to kill. I think there was a moment after a couple of loops that I had a false sense of security. I thought, oh, they're silly, they won't find me here, thinking that the Eternalists were just made to be a little dumber because the challenge is the actual puzzle. But then all of a sudden they did find me, and they travelled over to me in this spot where they couldn't previously, or they couldn't figure it out previously, so something had definitely changed. And I think it helps you break out of the same patterns. If you die, you just try again. Is the game difficulty too hard? So far, not really. As the game might get more difficult based on my performance, I'm collecting all these powers and weapons that actually make me quite hard to kill. So it kind of just makes sense really. Plus, no one can crap on you for only playing the game in a certain difficulty because the game just bends to you. Deverez asks, how's the style? Has it maintained that 70s Blaxploitation, James Bond aesthetic throughout your playthrough? Well, there are certain locations that focus more on the 50s military presence, but yeah, for the most part, Deathloop is very heavily influenced by the 60s and 70s time period and styles. It's very much obvious through the game so far, especially when it comes to music, in both the general level music, but also in the songs that the Eternalists sing and the songs that you listen to on the radios. This question actually comes from a sneaky 3D animation dev from the Deathloop team at Arcane, who asks, does the animation look particularly fun? And yes, honestly, it does look really, really good. There are lots of quirks in specific characters' movements that give off their personality extremely well. And combat animations are super fun. NPC KOH asks, which Visionary has the funniest dialogue? And this really depends on your humour because they're all a little different from one another. Now, I personally think that it's Alexis, but there is another character I love, and that's all I'll say. FoofExe asks for basically all my favourites here, and this is what we're going to end on. My favourite weapon is the Strelak 50/50 shotgun. I just think it really packs a punch. It was even able to two-shot an AI Julianna, so it was pretty handy. My favourite trinket is... I would say my favourite character trinket is Spring Healed, which just lets you double jump, which is so helpful. And my favourite weapon trinket is probably between Mind Leech, which is where enemies suffer damage and lose power when hit, and Speed Loader for increased reload speed, because that just helps a lot. But there are a lot of helpful and very practical weapon trinkets, so it's hard to choose. Plus, I haven't actually found them all yet. There are a lot. My favourite slab is... I think it's too basic to say Shift, but it's always equipped, so it must be true. But other than Shift, I really enjoy Nexus. Nexus can help you make some real crazy plays, and I've just had a lot of fun with that. For me personally, it's been really handy because I've been really bad with combat on the controller, so I'll very clumsily alert a lot of enemies, and they'll all radio enemies from around the district. They end up all coming to the building I'm hiding on the roof of and shooting and throwing things at me. So I just hide behind the chimney, throw Nexus, and then try to headshot one of them. That's how I've been coping so far. My favourite visionary, that's a really hard one, but at the moment it's Charlie Montague. His games are really creative and it brings something very colourful and interesting to multiple districts. My favourite district is, I've grown really fond of Updam. That's just the district I'm exploring the most at the moment. I've noticed so many little things that have caught my interest, but Carl's Bay, which is the one that you've been shown a lot of, and the only district you're allowed to really be shown, there are a lot of really cool things to find and see. It's a really pretty map. It's got a lot of different styles within it. It's got this very carnival-like vibe, but also history embedded within it. So it does make exploring the district really fun. My favorite time period is the evening when everyone's partying and you get to see the effects of everything you fucked with earlier in the day. It's really cool to see how your actions throughout the day have, in the end, affected a district. So that's all for the Q&A for now. There were a lot of restrictions on what we could and couldn't show and talk about to you. I'm sorry I can't be more in depth and show you a lot more of the game. There were quite a few restrictions and I don't want to spoil the game for you. A lot of these things you're going to find out very soon and I'm really excited for that. Just know that when the game drops, I'm planning on doing a lot of content on Deathloop. I'm also planning on streaming the game a lot, so follow my Twitch, follow my Twitter for updates for when I'm live, and also click the notification bell for my YouTube channel because I might be going live on YouTube as well. So keep an eye out for that. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you. The reason I'm doing this is because of you, so I really, really do mean that. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!